welcome everyone for joining us. And what we're going to see tonight is rivers beneath us, a look at the underground Wakulla Springs cave system. It's brought to you today by, I represent the Friends of Wakulla Springs, the Wakulla Springs Alliance, who's going to, right there. And of course, this lovely venue we have, which is the Wakulla Environmental Institute. And I just want to share with you the idea of this whole educational forum came together when we were discussing this really exciting news about the physical connection between the Chips Hole system and the Wakulla Cave system. And the successful dive had verified what was long speculated about the Chips Hole system and the Wakulla Cave system were actually physically connected. As we discussed the significance of this connection, we thought it would serve our community of interest, everyone here and everyone in the virtual world, to share this exciting work and all the effort that went behind it, plus the broader implications of what this finding actually represents. So from the seeds of this discussion, we bring you tonight this wonderful Springs Forum with the help of our guest. And I bring you rivers beneath us, and our first speaker here, of course, is Chris Warner. Okay, and let me introduce Chris real fast here. Chris, if you all do not know him, he's experienced explorer, researcher, filmmaker, and he's chronicled the scientific research and insightful documentaries. He has a PhD from the geophysical fluid dynamics, a master's in geology. Also, that bachelor's degree tags right along, doesn't it? Oh, look, and he has 20 years of multidisciplinary experience, leadership experience, strategic thinking, business experience, along with deep roots in technical, scientific, and engineering expertise. So this gives Chris really an edge in telling really exciting stories. And we're just absolutely thrilled that he's here to share with his presentation with us this evening. Chris?
Thank you. Is this on?
Yeah, press and hold. There you go.
Okay. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Good evening. Going to give you guys a short presentation and a little bit of video at the end. This one? That one. Yeah. And we are going to talk about some exciting stuff that's happened earlier this year with the actual physical connection between Chips Hole and the Wakulla Cave system. But we're also going to talk about, thank you for that. We're also going to talk about a little bit of the history of some of the cave exploration that's happened in this area. As many of you probably are not familiar with that, but it's a very exciting story. We're also going to talk about what's going on with the hydrologic system. Scientists talk about systems a lot, but basically we're going to follow the water in an exercise where we're going to swim upstream. And I think everybody's going to be surprised at how extensive and interconnected this hydrologic system in this area actually is. Okay, and at the end, we're going to then begin to put it all together. So first, what is the WKPP? WKPP is the Woodville Karst Plain Project. We're a volunteer organization that's been working for 30 plus years in this area. We've surmounted 8,500 plus dives in that long history, 400,000 hours underwater. And we've been an official project since 1990. We've got approximately 75 team members, volunteers, researchers. We explore, survey, document, educate, and provide research assistance support for researchers who are interested in the hydrology or geology of the area. We partner with researchers, resource managers, like your park managers or your state forest. We also partner with landowners who are curious about water-filled sinkholes on their property. Is there anything down there? Where may it go? And we also work with citizens groups as part of our educational outreach. We've had a long history of working with Wakulla Springs and the many park personnel there. So you can see the names of a lot of those people that we've been working with for quite some time. We're very proud of the collaboration that we've had with them. So now let's talk about a history of connecting caves. Does everybody know about the first mastodons that were found in Wakulla Springs? Well, most people would point to what happened in the mid-1950s with Gary Saltzman and Wally Jenkins. But in 1850, the first mastodon bone was actually pulled out of the Wakulla River. And then in the 1930s, they brought in a hard hat diver to dive to 15 to 20 feet into the river and excavate a full mastodon, even before that, okay? But there's been lots of explorers who have been jumping into the sinkholes and the springs in the area, starting really in the 1960s and early 70s. Most of you won't be familiar with their names, but for the cave divers out there or the other explorers, they will. So I'm not going to read through all of them, but they're there. The first two sinkholes that were connected happened to be Lower River and Upper River Sink, which is now owned as part of the Florida the National Fish and Wildlife Service on a piece of federal land. And that happened in 1972. Shortly after that, in the mid-1970s, everything from Clear Cut Sink, which is now part of the Wakulla Forest and part of Wakulla Springs State Park, down to Promise Sink was actually connected. Has anybody been to Emerald Sink, right off of New Light Church Road? Emerald, Cheryl, Circle Chasm, Split Sink, those were all connected in 1976 and 1977. It wasn't until 1980 that Emerald was actually connected to Clear Cut Sink. And that passage was approximately 180 to 190 feet deep. And that's why it took so long, because that exploration was quite daring at the time. People also connected Promising south towards Upper River. So that connecting those three systems together became known as the River Sinks Cave System back in the day. So in the 80s, that's what we called it. People were still diving within the National Forest, and what we call now Leon Sinks geologic area. We're jumping in those holes, seeing what's in there. But it wasn't until 1988 that members of the fledgling Woodville Karst Plain project connected Sullivan Sink to Cheryl Sink. That was a world record at the time. The average depth on that traverse between those two sinks was 190 feet deep, and it took them, it was 8,600 feet in distance, so over a mile to connect those sinks. In 1996, members of the team connected Big Dismal to Cheryl Sink, establishing what we then refer to as the Leon Sinks Cave System. Yeah. In 2006, we got permission to enter a private landowner's property at Natural Bridge State Park, and we connected 13 sinks all the way to the St. Marks River rise. So you guys are getting the point point here that these connections have been going on for decades. Okay, and as technology has advanced, we've been able to connect more and more. Probably the most fundamental connection was between the Leon Sinks Cave System and Wakulla Spring in 2007. And two members of the team, Jared Jablonski and Casey McKinley, our current project director, did the traverse from Turner Sink all the way to Wakulla Springs at a distance of over 35,000 feet. Okay? Pretty amazing. So, earlier this year, two members of the Woodville Karst Plain Project, Blake Wilson and Steve Cox, connected Chips Hole to the Wakulla Cave System from Turner Sink. Let's talk about that connection a little bit. Been working on it for quite some time, over a decade. So the guys really started looking at that system in 2012. They connected it on January 7th, 2023. So Leon Sinks Cave, the Wakulla Leon Sinks system was 38 miles long, Chips Hole about 7 miles long. Together now, we're almost 45 miles of surveyed and mapped underwater cave between Leon and Wakulla County, just in one cave system. And one of the things that we did is we found the spot that they made the connection, and it happened to be in Greenlee Acres, not far from here. And you can see the little orange pylon of where that ended up being in somebody's front yard. So there's the Wakulla Cave System, and that's what we're calling it now. And you can see the way we did this is we tried for long periods of time to try and connect from the chip side, but we were running into passage getting smaller and smaller and smaller. The guys remained diligent. We tried some new places. We tried from the Turner side. On the deep end, we couldn't do that. And finally, we decided, hey, we're gonna do a dye trace from the furthest most point in Chips Hole and see if we can pick up that dye along the Wakulla Cave System. And so we set 13 dye traps. We had 2 controls in there for a total of 15 traps. And we ended up getting dye in 2 places downstream of Turner Sink. And so we knew it had to be, the dye had to be coming in there. And so the guys went in, and it was a small, silty little passage, but they persevered through weekend after weekend after weekend, had to change their configuration to fit through some of the small places, but eventually they did it. And on January 7th, they connected it. And so you guys should know that Wakulla Cave System is the longest underwater cave in the United States, and it's right here in Wakulla County. If it was dry and above water, you'd probably have a national park that would rival Mammoth Cave National Park in Kentucky. Just because you see it, just because you can't see it, doesn't mean it's not there. Believe me, I've been in it, it's there. Okay, so that connection point was right there, and you can see that blue dot on there between the two, between Turner Sink and Chips Hole on the far left. And that red line, those red lines are the actual cave passages themselves. And here is a picture of our intrepid explorers, members of the team, Blake Wilson and Steve Cox, and all the hard work following that, that connection dive. Okay, so let's now do an exercise where we follow the water. All right, everybody's familiar with the rivers around here, right? Starting on the western side, we've got the Wakulla River. To the east of that, we've got the St. Mark's River with that confluence at St. Mark's itself. Go a little bit farther east, and you've got the Wakulla River and then the Wakulla. The pink shaded area is what we call, as geologists call, the Woodville Karst Plain. It's a distinct landscape that geologists have for decades referred to in this area. The green shading to the right is an updated map the Florida Geologic Survey put out, and it's very much the same as the Woodville Karst Plain. It's called the Perry Karst Plain, and it extends all the way down to the Steinhatchee. So in this area, you've essentially got very thin sands sitting on top of limestone. You don't have what you have up in Tallahassee, which is the Hawthorne Formation, which is consolidated sediments and whatnot that cap the limestone. Here, your limestone is essentially exposed at the surface in this area, okay? All in that pink and all in the green. Talked about those large rivers there, yeah? What feeds those rivers? All of you know this, you've seen it. Really big first magnitude springs, right? So at the coast, you've got Spring Creek, you've got Wakulla Spring, which feeds the Wakulla River. You've got the St. Mark's River Rise, which collects a whole bunch of water, puts it into the St. Mark's. You've got the upper reach of the St. Mark's that dives below water at Natural Bridge. And you've got all kinds of other passages coming in that area at Natural Bridge that add significant water to the St. Mark's, which then comes out of the St. Mark's River Rise. Everybody's familiar with Wakulla Springs, another large spring. Lots of small springs feed that as well. And you've got the Newtall Rise, which is a continuation of the Wakulla as it dives underwater. Anybody hike the Wakulla Trail? See all those sinks and sinkholes there? Water comes up, flows on the surface for a while, then dives back down, right? All of that water comes out at the Newtall Rise and then flows to the Gulf of Mexico, okay? We've also got a whole heck of a lot of small springs, which also contribute to those river flows. Okay, things like McBride Spring, Sally Ward Spring, Shepherd Spring. There's all kinds of springs up in those areas. Yeah. Now, if I looked at the top 20% of the largest sinkholes in the area, where do you think those are? That seem to be almost all over the place. It's only the top 20%. Lots of them are north and northwest of Wakulla Spring. There's quite a few that are also in and near the St. Mark's River Rise. And there's a few scattered up in the Tallahassee area. So lots of large sinkholes. Let's keep going. If we enter some of those springs and we begin to swim in the caves that are at the bottom of some of those springs, I'm going to zoom in now and take a look really at eastern Wakulla County. We see that most of these are fed by cave systems. The largest one on there is the Wakulla Cave System. 45 miles of mapped passage. We've got other cave systems in the area. We've got Indian Springs, got Sally Ward Spring, those have caves in them. We've got a newly acquired plot of land called the Feral Tract, which is now part of Wakulla Springs State Park. That's got several large sinkholes on it. And guess what? They have caves in them. Eating House Cave, Feral Cave, Gator Hole Cave. Anybody ever been down to Shepherd Spring in the St. Mark's Refuge? Beautiful spring. Don't go there in the middle of summer though. Go in the winter.
Why?
Because you'll get eaten alive. It's too hot and muggy, lots of flies and mosquitoes. But it's a beautiful site. It's got a very extensive cave system in it called Shepherd Cave, right? Even along 98, some of the sinkholes there, we've done some work in the past being able to connect them. Even down at Spring Creek, we've been able to get in a few of those cave systems and push them, not very far because conditions usually don't warrant, but there's caves there, okay? And all the water that's flowing out of a lot of these springs is coming from the caves. All right, let's swim through the caves and see what else is there. If we keep swimming, we would eventually come to where some of the water dives down below the ground. And we call those swallows. So anybody ever gone to Natural Bridge and seen the St. Mark's dive down below the ground? Pops up on the other side of the road, right? And keeps doing that. We see that there. So lots of big swallows there. We've also got them on the western boundary of the Woodville-Karst Plain, just to the west of US 319. We've got Fisher Creek swallow. If you've ever hiked the Leon Sinks Geologic Trail, you've seen Fisher Creek. That dives below, right? We've got other ones like Black Hole. Anybody ever been to Ames Sink? Ames Sink is, see if I can use the pointer. Ames Sink is right there.
Show on this one.
Yeah, I want to show you this one. Sink is right there. Okay. It's fed by, guess what? Munson Slough, which comes from Lake Munson. Where does Lake Munson fill up from? Tallahassee and the Cascade Lakes. Yeah. So if you look, who knows what this one is right here, right west of where we are in Crawfordville. Who knows what that is?
Lost Creek.
Lost Creek. Exactly. That one right there. Lost Creek, far west, bottom left. Yeah, Lost Creek dives underground very close to 319. You know, you can track that. That drains a large portion of the Appalachian National Forest, Apalachicola National Forest, right? That one's Jump Creek. That one's Fisher Creek. That one's Munson Slough. All these sloughs and creeks and streams, even if they don't flow all the time, still provide water that comes straight down into the aquifer. And that water then travels by a cave passage. It comes up at a lot of the springs that you know. And you say, well, Chris, how do you know that happens? Well, I know that happens because we did a whole lot of dye tracing over the past 2 decades, ladies and gentlemen. We started, Dr. Todd Kincaid, Garrett Davies, Tim Hazlitt, myself, members from Northwest Florida Water Management, FGS, DEP, all participated in those studies. And what did we find? We found that a lot of these were connected. Yeah. In 2002, we traced Fisher Creek to Emerald Sink. In 2003, we traced Black Creek to Emerald Sink. Oh, sorry, go back.
Where's Emerald Sea?
Emerald Sink is right there. Fisher Creek's right there, and Black Creek is right there. So on this side, that's Emerald Sink. We're talking about this Fisher Creek, and then this is Black Hole. Black Creek comes down, goes to the Black Hole, goes straight over to Emerald Sink. Where's Emerald Sink go? Follow the cave. Goes straight to Wakulla Springs. Okay, next thing we traced 2005. Kelly Sink and Ames Sink. Remember I was talking about Ames Sink and Kelly Sink? There they are, right there. Guess where they went? First went to Indian Spring, and then they went to Wakulla. Did we make a physical connection between Indian Spring and Wakulla? Haven't been able to do it yet. Does it mean we can't do it? Maybe, but the water goes there. That's how we know. 2006, we went out to the city of Tallahassee spray field. Put water in one of their monitoring, we put dye in one of their monitoring wells, and also in Turf Pond. It's the southeast spray field for the city of Tallahassee. Yeah, guess where that went? Wakulla Springs. Starting to get the idea? It's all connected, all of it. Okay, then we started to get a little ambitious. We said, where the heck do you think Lost Creek's going? Where'd that one go? Well, turns out, it's not only going to these caves down here on 98, but it's also going to Spring Creek. And we also saw that dye go to the bottom part of Wakulla Springs and come out of Wakulla Springs itself. We repeated that trace just to make sure we had it right. And we got the same results the second time. Okay. Thank you for that. That's perfect, Alexis. All right. Let's get even more ambitious. Now we're in an expanded view. Who knows what's up in the far right corner up there? Anybody been up there? What's up there, sorry?
Bird Sink.
Bird Sink. That's exactly right. Bird Sink. Bird Sink's got a pretty big cave in it. Do we know where it goes? Well, the cave divers didn't know where it goes. Chip kept trying to explore it. It's a big old swallow. And it takes a lot of water. Guess where that came out? Hornet Spring and St. Mark's River Rise. And a few little springs in the area, like Road Springs and some other. So all those, all in the same place. Yeah. So there's a few things I want you guys to take away from this presentation. Just because we can't physically connect something with a diver doesn't mean that it's not connected. The water is going to go there. Okay? The water goes there. It's part of your hydrologic cycle. It's where you live. So everything that comes out of those springs. So if you're a sportsman and you love fishing, if you love hunting, you'll like me, you like diving, or if you just like to go out and you're a photographer and you want to go hiking or whatnot, everything depends on the water, guys. All of it. Okay? All of it depends on the water. And so we've had some issues in some places. Yeah. What was wrong with the city of Tallahassee spray field? Big lawsuit happened, right? They weren't treating the water to get rid of some of the nitrate, right? That trace proved that that was degrading the water at Wakulla Springs. City of Tallahassee had to pay for that upgrade. I think it's on the order of a couple $100 million for that upgraded facility to strip out a lot of that nitrate so that the water quality at Wakulla could improve. Okay. We also know that septic systems can be an issue. Yeah. That's why there's a big push in Tallahassee and in this area to get people onto city water so you can treat that before you reapply it to the ground surface and keep that water in the basin. But you've also got other issues, right? Sometimes people make mistakes, or sometimes storage tanks or whatnot leak. What you're seeing here are all the known places that we have had a petroleum spill that's got a mappable plume. So a plume of contaminants moving into your aquifer. Those are the places that they are. Are you surprised by how many there are? It's not even all of them. It's just the ones with a mapped plume. Think that's going to affect your groundwater? Going to affect those fish you're trying to catch on the weekend with your boy or your girl? Going to affect the animals that eat those fish or depend on that? I believe it. Okay, key takeaways for you guys. Now, your surface streams, the sloughs, swallets, sinkholes, underground caves, springs and large rivers are all part of your natural hydraulic system in the Woodville Karst plant. Okay, that's all part of your, remember when you were a kid in grade school and you did the water cycle? This is your water cycle. Okay, underwater cave exploration has led to an understanding that a lot of those sinkholes were connected. Yeah, by physically going there, that's what the cave explorers did. Over time, they began to connect those even more. You can see how extensive that's become now. Now 40, 50, 60 years of underwater cave exploration in the area. Dye traces have confirmed many of the creeks and swallets are connected to some of the largest springs in the area. And it was the impetus for making sure that when in 2007, the guys pushed from Turner Sink to connect it to Wakulla Springs, we had done the dye trace a year before to confirm it. So we knew it was there. Yeah. What did we do for Chips Hole? We did a dye trace to confirm it was there. And then guess what? We found that physical connection. Okay, that's the big takeaway. All these watersheds of all these branches of the creek, the underwater caves, the rivers, they all transporting that water through your county to the Gulf of Mexico. The swallets and sinks provide direct access to the underwater conduits in the aquifer and are vulnerable to any point source pollutant, whether that be petroleum, whether it be nitrate. Okay, it's all going to get into the aquifer. There's no getting around it. And so if there's anything that I leave you, your hydrologic system has an unprecedented connectedness that should not be underestimated. If I had funding from the government, I bet I could go to the northern part of Leon County or Jefferson County, dump dye in some of these swalettes or sinkholes that I know of. And I bet I could trace that to the St. Mark's River Rise, Wassissa, or Wakulla. Guaranteed it. No, because researchers have created models with the water balance taking into account all the rainfall, the volumes in the aquifer, and a lot of what feeds Wakulla Springs stretches up into southern Georgia. All of that feeds Wakulla Springs. Okay. All right. So I've been working on a documentary. It's coming along. It has a lot about the connection on it. And so I wanted to give you guys a taste of that, if we can. Did we accidentally get this? With me. No, go to this guy, right? Yeah. That's the link there.
Chip's Hole, from a cave diving perspective, presents a lot of unique challenges that don't exist in other places in the Woodville-Karst Plain.
There's a spot on Scheck's notes at about 9,500 feet out where he says there's a place called Lost Hope. Scheck wrote it there, and it's a potential lead. But nobody'd ever looked at it.
And as it's proving to be, it's challenging. Even as we get closer and closer to what should be a connection.
I first became really concerned about what was going on at Wakulla Springs in 1992 because there were fewer and fewer days that the glass bottom boats could operate.
It was getting overrun with an invasive plant called hydrilla. Populations were changing. The plant populations and the fish and things that lived there were changing.
So it doesn't take very much in the way of either changes in water quality or water quantity to see a change in that ecology. So that's essentially what we were looking at.
We needed to use all the tools available to us to try and make this happen.
But very quickly, you know, we're running out of good, promising leads to connect these things.
As a team to do in Chip's Hole, we had to use the science. The geology wasn't showing us anything, so we decided to plan and execute our first real exploration dye trace.
We're running out of options here. Entrance? Nope. Nope.
Oh, man. Oh, no.
Okay, this is going to be Turner 190. Oh. That's a positive.
That is a positive.
The biggest challenge is people.
Right now, Wakulla County is seeing a huge explosion of development. And, you know, people want to move here, and I understand and appreciate that. But if you move here, you also have to understand that you're going to have an impact on this area, particularly the groundwater.
And wise decisions about land use and what goes on the land and what its impacts are or can be on the water quality and mitigating that. And so making some smart decisions about all of those things.
If you want to learn more about the documentary, you can go to that website. We've also got a Facebook page, but more importantly, if you want to watch any trailers that we put out there, they're on YouTube. So you can find them there. Thank you very much.
Wow, Chris, that was great. Thank you so much. I know people have a lot of questions. We're going to hold questions till the end of all the presentations. Okay, so we have our next presentation will be with Jade. And Jade's a research assistant with the Davo Moore Center. He's also a senior at Florida State University. He's studying economics and international relations. Previously, he had been engaged in policy research at the Brookings Center, Wilson Center, and the FSU Center for Economic Forecasting and Analysis. At the Economic Forecasting Analysis Center, he found a passion for understanding the economic value of North Florida Springs and the correlation between spring health and visitor recreational expenditure. And we thought it was important to bring in that economic idea to this conversation that we have here today. Jay, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Can you guys hear me? Awesome. For sure. All right, well, she introduced me really, really well, but she introduced me really, really well, but I just want to say it's a really big privilege to come here and talk to you guys a little bit about my research when it comes to the economics of the Springs. I want to thank everyone that made this event possible, and I want to thank you guys both that are here in person and those that come in virtually to come here and learn more about the Springs and why it's so important that we come and protect them. So a little bit about my background. I know I'm sick. Sorry about that. Well, a little bit of about my background. I know she touched on it, but really, I'm a senior at Florida State University. I study economics and international affairs in the College of Social Science and Public Policy. I'm also currently a public policy intern at the Davo L. Moore Center, which is a think tank in our college where we do market research pertaining to public policy issues within the state of Florida. And my research was on the Springs. My research has been published on a blog post on the center's website, as well as it was recently featured in an op-ed in the Tallahassee Democrat. I was also last summer a research assistant at the Center for Economic Forecasting and Analysis under Dr. Julie Harrington. Over there, I worked on the economic valuation report on the estuary programs in North Florida, which is where the inspiration for my current spring research really stemmed from. In the future, I plan on getting a master's in economics. I'm graduating from my undergraduate in a week, actually, which is kind of crazy to think about. But hopefully down the line, I want to get a master's and hopefully work within the policy analysis and economic impact space. Enough about me though, let's talk a little bit more about the Springs. So we have a little basic framework for today. We're going to start off by giving a brief introduction on North Florida Springs, then move on, talk about their economic significance and environmental degradation, before wrapping up by discussing current Springs legislation, the challenges associated with that legislation, and potential policies for reform. So a little bit of an introduction. The Springs are highly valued environmental resources, known for their water quality and recreational appeal. A lot of you may not know this, but North Florida, along with Central Florida, is home to the densest concentration of freshwater springs in the world. Consequently, North Florida's economy heavily depends on this abundant natural resource, as visitors and locals take advantage of warm, humid climates, as well as the spring's scenic charm. Unfortunately, North Florida Springs face several anthropogenic or human-created stressors that impair the quality and quantity of spring water and its ecosystems. To dive into the recreational value of the Springs, I wanted to give you guys some numbers, if you will. As a hotspot for spring water recreation, Springs contribute significantly to local employment, expenditures, and revenue. For instance, during the 2021-2022 fiscal year, Wakulla Springs had 180,489 people visit. And in general, each visitor to those springs spent $160.77 per day, supporting 318 jobs and contributing approximately $22,684,002 to the local economy, which is a huge number if you really think about it. Now, for the most part, these figures represent improvements from 2018, where average per person per day expenditure increased by 29.57%. Total jobs supported increased by 28.23%, and total direct economic impact increased by 29.12%. With that said, however, the number of visitors between 2018 and the 2021-2022 fiscal year has decreased by 12.4%, which is likely attributed to the after effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and possibly also attributed to the deterioration in water quality. And in figure 2, you can see some of the main attractions at Wakulla Springs, Springs, which include the jungle cruise, as well as the iconic diving platform. I was actually there last week and it was so much fun. I loved it. To go further into recreational value, I want to give you guys an estimation of Wakulla Springs visitors by category and from 2002, and I converted it to current US dollars. As you can see from figure 3, the main categories of spending and employment are lodging, food and beverages, shopping, and all other categories. Now, if you look at the totals, you can see that Wakulla Springs Park contributes approximately 7.5% of total employment and 3.4% of wages in the county for that 2002 year. Now, granted, while the data is from 2002, it does give you guys a very good indication of just how important Wakulla Springs is to the county and all the economic significance associated with it. So what's the correlation between economic value and environmental quality? Well, significance of the springs' economic contributions to Wakulla County and the region as a whole relies on the water flow condition and quality. Unfortunately, North Florida springs, along with the rest of the state springs for that matter, have experienced drastic changes in water quality and quantity over the last decade due to nutrient loading and excessive pumping. Nutrient loading, which is an increased nutrient concentration in spring waters due to growing populations, filling septic tanks, and the use of synthetic fertilizers have increased algal blooms. These excessive algal blooms have contaminated drinking water, leading to a loss of county and state revenues because it's impacted marine animals, recreation, businesses, and property values. At Wakulla Springs, dirty water causing reduced visibility has led to the grounding of iconic glass bottom boat tours, which was a popular tourist and local attraction. In addition, excessive pumping is a huge issue in the county. More than 4 billion gallons of groundwater are drawn daily from the Florida aquifer, which is a primary source of Wakulla and the rest of the state's springs. In fact, in 2019, it was estimated that excessive pumping from bottling companies, municipalities, and agriculture has led to an estimated 1/3 decrease in water flow across all of Florida springs, which just goes to show how big of an issue excessive pumping is. To give you guys an indication of just how big of an issue the algae takeover is at Wakulla Springs, our figure 4 shows an aerial view of the docks from 1967. As you can see in the figure, the water clarity was pretty superb, and in general, while there was some algal buildup near the docks, in general, the water clarity was really good and the water quality was really good as well. However, if you flash forward to 2014, that same aerial view of the docks shows just how much the water quality has decreased over time and how much the algal blooms have increased in volume because they're now near the docks and as well as in the main area as well. And this photo was courtesy of the Tallahassee Democrat. To go further into the impact of algal takeover at Wakulla Springs, I want to show you guys this figure, which shows the glass bottom boat tour days per year from 1987 to the 2019, when the reporting stopped. As you can see from the figure, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, the glass bottom boat tours were happening on average between 150 to 200 days per year. I'm sure a lot of you guys here have been on them at some point or another. However, in the last 5 years, the glass bottom boat tours are basically essentially non-existent because of how dirty the water has gotten and how bad the water quality has been over the last few years. And this represents not only a loss to the local economy, but also a loss to the local community, because I'm sure a lot of you guys here and a lot of you guys on the virtual Zoom as well have unique memories when it comes to just how cool of an attraction this was. I never really got the chance to be in it, but I really wish I had. And last but not least, I wanted to show you guys the nitrogen and groundwater footprint in North Florida. Both figure 7 and figure 8 show the updated results from the 2019 Blue Water Audit Analysis. On figure 7 shows the nitrogen aquifer footprint, while figure 8 shows the groundwater aquifer footprint. In figure 7, the nitrogen aquifer footprint is an indicator of how much nutrient loading is in the water and the decrease in water quality. As you can see in the figure, Tallahassee and the area around Wakulla, as well as Orlando and Tampa, and area between Orlando and Tampa, are areas of high to severe impact in terms of nutrient loading into the water, and as marked by the darker shades. And in figure 8, you can see that same results for the groundwater aquifer footprint, where Tallahassee, Orlando, Tampa, as well as Jacksonville are areas of severe to high impact in terms of excessive pumping from the water. And when it comes to North Central Florida, Jacksonville is by far the area of biggest impact. And I'm sure if we had the same results for South Florida, you'd see that over there is also a huge impact as well. So what is the impact of environmental degradation on spring economics? Well, reducing spring flows and deteriorating water quality significantly impact spring-related recreational user expenditures, lowering economic activity in North Florida. A recent study measuring the perceptions and attitudes of visitors to 4 springs in the Suwannee River and Santa Fe River Basin indicate that 90% of visitors visit springs for the sole purpose of recreation. The researchers found a strong positive association between visitor trip frequency and water clarity. And based on the responses from the visitors, the researchers estimated that 1 unit increase in the Likert scale of the perceived water quality can be attributed to 27% more visits, which just goes to show how statistically correlated water clarity and visitor trip frequency is, and how important it is that we solve this issue. So what is the state government doing to protect our springs? Well, in 2016, the legislature chose 30 outstanding springs of historical importance for additional protection and restoration, creating a series of basement management action plans, also known as BMAPs, to address water quality issues from nitrogen pollution. And in figure 10, you can see the approximate boundaries of the spring sets associated with the legislation, and Wakulla Springs is actually one of those springs protected under the legislation. In addition to that, in 2019, Governor DeSantis created the Blue-Green Algae Task Force, which expedites progress towards reducing the adverse impacts of toxic blue-green algal blooms. And they were tasked with conducting research on the springs, as well as providing recommendations to the governor's office. And last but not least, earlier this year, Governor DeSantis signed an executive order called 2306, which included provision to strengthen BMAPs by providing specific roadmaps and projects to meet the requisite water quality standards and achieve restoration objectives. Now, despite legislative findings indicating that urgent action is needed, the state government has failed to implement necessary provisions in its BMAPs, which limits its ability to meet water quality and quantity objectives. The basement management action plans, for example, do not account for future population growth and the increase in pollution loading that stem from that future population growth. As more and more people end up moving into our state, that's going to be a huge issue moving down the line. In addition, BMAPs lack a comprehensive monitoring process to measure compliance with water quality standards and identify areas of improvement. A bill introduced in the 2022 legislative session called SB 832 would have added layer of scrutiny to the effectiveness of BMAPs by requiring consistent monitoring and inspections. However, the legislature did not pass it, unfortunately. So what are we to do moving forward, and how can we better protect our springs? Well, to improve the condition of springs in North Florida, the Florida Springs Council called for the implementation of the Blue-Green Algae Task Force recommendations, as well as other strategies. Number 1, there must be strategic improvements in BMAP funding to accelerate progress towards restoration by addressing the most pollutant sources in the most cost-effective ways possible. In addition, integrated monitoring and modeling are necessary to ensure projects are working smoothly and identify improvement areas. And last but not least, it is essential to consistently update BMAP regulations and strategies to account for changes in demographics and increases in populations. In addition to these recommendations, my research at the Development Center has revealed that charging a fair market price for aquifer withdrawals is essential for both public and private users, as that would not only discourage waste, but also incentivize greater efficiency when it comes to withdrawing water from our aquifer. So in conclusion, Florida Springs are one of our state's most cherished resources, nourishing people and wildlife, offering opportunities for recreation, and stimulating county and state economies. Florida's adoption of these recommendations from the Blue-Green Algae Task Force would not only support the future of these springs, but also protect the economic value they present to North Florida's communities and Wakulla specifically. In the meantime, to effectively manage and protect water resources in Florida, it is important to have sustained advocacy and research to urge the government towards reform and become more educated about the issues surrounding our springs and their economic value. I want to thank you guys for coming here today and listening to me talk a little bit about the springs. I hope you learned something new, and I hope this was beneficial to you guys. I want to thank our sponsors for hosting this incredible event. Shout out to the Friends of Wakulla Springs, the Wakulla Springs Alliance, as well as the Environmental Institute for all that they do to protect our springs. And thank you guys again for having me. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions or concerns, my email's over there, but thank you.
Thanks a lot. Okay, we have one more presenter, okay? And coming up down the aisle, let me introduce to you Tom Greenhalgh. Tom's a PG for many years. He's also the director of the Karst Center at the Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Institute at Florida State University. His areas of interest and expertise are hydrogeology, groundwater contamination, dye tracing, spring shed delineation, and offshore springs. Tom has over 35 years of experience performing environmental work. As a professional geologist, he's worked across the state of Florida doing spring shed delineations and groundwater contamination assessments. Not only does he have a great love for the springs professionally, also personally, it's near and dear to him. And Tom, I want to thank you for coming.
Thank you, Renee.
Thank you.
I have to hold it.
You did.
Good evening, and thanks for your interest in springs, really, because for about 35 years, I've been focused on groundwater issues, and sometimes it's a real difficult road. I'm going to jump right in. When Renee first asked me if I'd come down, she asked me to do stuff on groundwater vulnerability. So you're going to get a little reiteration of some of the things that Chris went over and the like. This is the Florida platform at the glacial maximum about 18,000 years ago when sea level was lower. And the reason I bring this slide in is to show you how extensive the limestone and dolostone platform is under the Gulf of Mexico and into the Atlantic. But there's the Florida we see now. There was the Florida 18,000 years ago. The geology of the state, I always hate putting up maps that are like this because you can't see from the back of the room. It doesn't mean anything to you. But what you need to see, as you saw earlier, some of them talking about this being the Karst Plain. This is the purple is Swanee limestone, Ocala limestone. This whole area of Florida is at limestone outcrops there. This little area right there is the area where the Avon Park Formation, which is the oldest limestone we have exposed at the surface in Florida, Eocene of age. The other interesting thing, we have a cross-sectional thing of the geology. It's from A to B, which is basically Pensacola over to Jacksonville. All these colors below the purple are limestones, and this is the sands and clays that overlay those limestones. And then when we go from the top of North Florida down to the Keys, A to B, you can see real dark, thick piece of Avon Park and then Swanee, Ocala. But what I want you to realize that to draw that map to that scale, you have to do a lot of exaggeration. The real truth is, if I took that and stretched it for 65 miles, it'd be about as thin as a sheet of paper. You wouldn't see anything. And that's what I tell people too, with the aquifer under the state of Florida. I tell you here in Leon County, you got 2,000 feet of fresh water, but in reality, if you stretch it across, the aquifer is really, really thin. Go forward or back. This is typical what you see where the Florida aquifer is thinly confined. You know, you got just a tiny area of sands or clays and sands, and then you have the limestone directly over it. when I was doing some work down in Suwannee County, I wanted to show you this slide because you can see there's a little tiny thin layer of soils that have some organics in it, topsoil. Beneath that is a real fine, clean sands overlaying the limestone. And there, the limestone is just below what you can see in the picture because this is a collapsed sink in one of the fields. But what we learned down there was is not only do you have preferential flow in the aquifer system, as Chris has talked about with conduits and the like, we also have it in the overlying sands and the like. If you want to read it, but I'll just tell you what happened. About 80% of the recharge occurred through these little interfingering things that went through the sand. And it was also proven where there was a dye put in the fertigation strip, and it fingered too. So it was pretty interesting. You heard him talk about karstification or dissolution of the limestone. This is over in Levy County where the overburden has been stripped off. And that's the surface of the limestone when the throats of those various karst features have been thawed out, washed out. You would see this in this county as well. A lot of times you drive over, they're infilled with sand or clay. Maybe not as extensive this because that's Ocala limestone. The St. Mark's is a little more resistant, but I've seen areas here where you go to a pit and you'll also see that. But that's just, when you hear me say karstification, it's basically dissolution of limestone or dolstones. And that's how we get a lot of the landforms you see here, sinkholes, springs, valleys, lakes even here are results of dissolution. This is the entire Florida now system. It extends from up in Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, and that's the extent of it. Extends under the entire state of Florida, and it also extends offshore. You have to realize that limestone out there, it may not be a freshwater system, but there's also would be considered an aquifer system. One point that I wanted to make from this, it's one of the most productive aquifer systems in the world. If you'll see up there, all of our first magnitude springs discharge out of that system. Not out of the special, not out of the intermediate. They all come out of the Florida aquifer system. We talk about how vulnerable or the confinement on the system. The stuff that's in purple where here is where the aquifer itself is basically right exposed to the surface. There's very little sand generally over it. The gray is usually less than 100 feet of overburdened sediments. And then the confined stuff, and I want you to pay attention because there's Leon and Wakulla County. You see the western side of this county and Leon, where you go into the forest where Chris was showing Black or Lost Creek come over and then being captured in a sinkhole. That's occurring right there where the limestone comes to the surface and it's covered in thin sands. And in the forest, you have some less permeable material that it's still percolating out there, but it'll flow overland. Then the little point that you got up there in Jefferson County and the edge of Leon, just south of that is where Berg Sink is. So this is where the aquifer itself is confined, thinly confined, and totally confined. Okay, vulnerability, and I don't want you to sit there and read this thing, but I should have. In 1968, people started talking about groundwater vulnerability. And then I was working in pesticides at the time in the 90s, and the NRC basically was talking about the relative ease at which a contaminant could get into the groundwater, okay? And they developed models for it. Groundwater vulnerability studies at the time, and they still are, used to try to manage your water resources, aiming at trying to keep the water quality up. The last yellow thing highlighted was the first model that I got involved with. It's called DRASTIC, and it's capitalized, and it stood for the depth to groundwater, recharge rate, the aquifer, but also the aquifer material, the soil over it, and as you'll see in subsequent slides, soil is probably one of the most strongest factors in vulnerability. topography. The vadozone pit, for those in here that knows a little hydrology, you have the land surface and the area down to the top of the water table is called the vadozone. It's not totally saturated. It's called, then you get into what we call the phreatic zone. And the aquifer hydroconductivity, basically its ability to transmit water. Here's the drastic map of the United States. And on a national scale, you see Florida is an extremely vulnerable place with that particular model. And the first time I saw this, I was pretty much shocked. I put it on my computer screen and left it up there and wanted people to see it and discuss it. But anyway, so here is the latest that when I was working at the Florida Geological Survey, they did this work for the state. But the point I want to make with this is you saw drastic showing you that the entire state basically is really vulnerable. What FAVA does, the Florida Aquifer System Relative Aquifer Vulnerability, is that it further segregates those vulnerabilities, the high vulnerability, into three categories or partitions. That you have high, got a little quicker. You got most vulnerable, vulnerable, and less vulnerable. What I'm telling you is basically all that's vulnerable. A couple years later, this one was done for this county, Wakulla County itself. And you can see the edge of the forest coming down, and then you can see highly vulnerable areas, and all the karst plains are extremely vulnerable. The training sites, they actually use nitrate contamination and well to run this model to pick out areas that were contaminated the most. Or I had to throw this up. I told Renee, it's old from Todd's work and when we were working with him. But anyway, for those of you, the picture on the left is an aerial photo. The blue in there is the cave system as we knew it then, and then the Wakulla Springs emanating a little bit of thing. The one on the right shows the land topography here with the main vent at Wakulla going down and then running, and you're looking south on this topo map toward the Gulf, and this is how the cave systems were known at that time and drawn. And an interesting thing as geologists, most of that cave system follows the zone between the St. Marks and the Swanee limestone. A lot of it follows right where the contact is. Chris went over there, and so I was telling Renee, I worked on this before the dye trace, but I was doing it from a nitrate perspective. The city of Tallahassee was allowing row crop agriculture on there, and the nitrates from the fertilizer was showing an increase not only in the wells, but also it correlated directly to Wakulla. So I was not surprised when the dye went there. I was surprised at the rate it went there, but I was not surprised when we worked on that. This is showing the dye trace in 06, wasn't it, Chris? Yeah, that went from the spray field to Sally Ward and the main spring. But an interesting thing I want to throw, because I've done a number of dye traces subsequent to this, that we see in Florida a lot of times when you do a dye trace that into one of these swallettes or other features, it discharges at multiple springs. So it's confirming that there's connection even with those multiple vents in an area. I think that's all I wanted. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say on that one. Bird sink, I went a little more in depth than Chris did. Bird sink's up here in just above the interstate. And it's actually in Leon County. You have to come from, well, you can come from both counties, but I usually come out of Jefferson to it. And it's 23.2 or 3 miles from it line of sight to Wakulla. The actual drainage, the topographical basin for it is about just 13,000 acres, and it runs down and goes directly into that sinkhole feature. I have a picture of it. This is Bird Sink when you're standing up on the northeast side of the sinkhole. What you see is a natural little spring that's creek, and flowing into Bird Sink. What's interesting is when the water's really high, it's not incised in that little creek, it's up here. And it flows into that sinkhole. This is in 2012, Scott Dyer and myself was putting the dye in for that dye trace there. And it was interesting because it was cool. It was in February. The little creek was going in with about a half a cubic foot per second of water going in. And as we introduced the dye, the cold water flowing into the groundwater there, the basin in the groundwater, probably 68, 69 degrees. The cold water in that creek was flowing over the lip of that sinkhole and just going right straight down in the cave. It took it several hours before the dye actually dissipated into here by diffusion, I guess, but turn it green. So it was pretty interesting, but that's a dye introduction right there. This is the results from that trace. As you can see, we're sampling all over Wakulla, the middle portion of the St. Mark's River, the springs all there, as well as Wakulla. But what you can see there is this is days from introduction, about 11.73 days, about the 12th day, we had a very rapid peak come through right there. If my memory's any good. It's about 114 parts per billion, right? 113 something. All right, y'all pay attention. But anyway, so we had about 114 parts per billion was our peak of the fluorescein dye that came through. It did it in 11 days, so it's moving about a mile a day. So that tells you as a geologist or hydrologist, it's open conduit flow for you to get that rate. We did about 50 or 60 days out, 52, we had a little tiny hit in Wakulla Springs. And I thought that was very interesting. We can get in an hour discussion on hydrology sometime, but so we did actually have a connection over to Wakulla as well. But it came out in, as Chris was talking about, Horn Springs, the upmost one there. There's a little one above the bridge up there in the river, came out of there, came out of roads 1, 2, and 3, St. Mark's River rise. That's a real interesting area too, as far as hydrology, but it came to all those. This is Horn Springs is in the upper right hand, and that's the actual run to the left. And that's before we had any dye detection in it. That's how it looked today. And then the next day we came back, you see the bottom screen, and we didn't have to call up the lab to see if we had a connection there. And actually, that's what 100 parts per billion fluorescein looks like. And as a dye tracer, I don't want to ever see that. I mean, it's great. It proves, but I'd rather see it come through at a concentration you can't see, but the lab can. And I mean, but for any naysayer, I don't know what happened there. We had some people camped over at one of their hunt camps, and the guy went out to whiz that night, and he comes back and he told the thing to turn green, and they didn't believe him. And then they went over there and they did believe him. But anyway, yeah, that's a little aside. The something that's kind of disconcerting to me, I put this little thing in the center that shows parts per billion and parts per billion. So you get 100 parts per billion, you get 0.1 parts per million. And Florida Springs that I've studied, there's a number of them, believe it or not, are over 10 milligrams per liter. You can't legally drink the water. But if the dye or nitrate would fluoresce like the dye, it would be 10 to 1,000 times greater green than that. So, I mean, everybody would know that there's true contamination in the system if they saw that. Those are some that I studied over in the Swanee Basin, and I just put them on there to show you. There's some of the springs there, and there's the larger circles. they're over 10 milligrams per liter. And, you know, I studied springs for a long, long time. Every spring that I've ever studied has elevated nitrate in it, whether even the ones coming out of the Ocala National Forest have slight elevations in them. And then some of them are tens of thousands of times what background concentrations were unimpacted. This was an interesting little study that was done, and I was hoping my friend Rick Hicks would show up because he did this data. This is some of my translations of it internally. But what we did is analyze for sucralose or Splenda. It's an artificial sweetener. And we know that that's directly humans' utilization of that. But it's also resistant to any modification during treatment at a wastewater facility. It's very conservative tracer, it's unimpacted, and it's very conservative in the environment. And as you probably know, Wakulla showed up with it, and we know that its connection to wastewater would make perfect sense. Some down in the central portion of Santa Fe, along the Springs coast, and then in the Orlando area and the bottom one there, Seminole County. But anyway, you can see those. I can't see them from here, but the springs are listed that had positive detections in it. And I wanted to do some further dye work on those. But the point of it is our system is already contaminated, and it's very vulnerable to contamination. So whatever we continue to do is going to continue to impact the system. And here was my little take home that Chris put up there. The groundwater in the entire state is very vulnerable. Here, specifically in North Florida, where you have the unconfined Florida, and you can, basically spit on the ground and it'll go to the aquifer. The conduits exist in areas of Florida aquifer system which is confined, and that was one of the greatest take homes that I got out of those dye traces we did up in the north end of the county, because most hydrologists would tell you it's confined and there's not going to be that great an impact. But when you have a closed basin that internally drains like that, you could have contamination move, well, a mile a day through your groundwater system. So, and that the conduits actually existed under that. Historically, we thought probably the clays would confine it and make it less susceptible to the dilution that would create conduits, but that's clearly not the case. What else do I have up there? Yeah. That's about it. I mean, really, and then I threw that last line in, but just for you, when you're doing your own personal activities, think about what impact you might have. I mean, I don't mow the grass, I don't fertilize the grass, I don't weed eat. My wife will tell you I'm guilty of all those, but yeah, I try to limit what you do. Thank you.
Okay. Okie dokie. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Chris. Dave, thank everybody. We're going to have a short Q&A because it's almost 8 o'clock. And so if anyone here has any questions, we have a couple hands up.
So I have a question. You made the comment about, and so in our unique geology here in the Woodville Karst Plain and the vulnerability to contaminant transport, can you explain a little bit more about what kind of soils and sands and things that we have and how contaminants go through?
Let me handle that. Clays are considered generally less permeable than sands, and it retards the flow of groundwater directly down, or it may even direct it to go somewhere else through an area that's easier to travel. I think you and I had a conversation earlier that I had seen where petroleum products that are non-polar could actually migrate in clays when they thought that they weren't, even though water might have a more difficult time to pass through it. But typically when geologists look at clays, it's a lower permeability material, and water doesn't actively or readily flow through it. I guess that answers the question.
I need to take an online one. Okay. Let's see.
Only our email.
Did the filming production company apply for the Florida sales tax exemption program to waive the fees that you all did because it was a nonprofit? That's the question. Wow, I have no idea. Let me take another one here. What is known about the extent to which the cave and the cavern system extends into the Florida shelf in the Gulf of Mexico?
Okay, so
How's that?
that's much better. We'll handle that. So the cave systems, there are some cave systems out towards the west into the Panhandle. Unfortunately, a lot of those formations dive to great depths at the farther west that you go. And part of that is not only the Apalachicola embayment, which used to transport a lot of sediments into the Gulf of Mexico, and that began to downwarp it. But the Mississippi River and the Pearl River were draining the backside of the Appalachians, and they basically warped down a lot of those limestones to the point where limestone couldn't form anymore. And so you've got a lot of clastic sediments there. So the farther west you go, the less and less you're going to have the limestones exposed to the surface. About as far west as you can go is probably in the Mariana area, and a little bit farther west than that, like the Puniac Springs and whatnot. So that's as far as you can go there.
Thank you.
Was the question about offshore too?
Yeah, offshore.
Yeah, offshore. There are some springs offshore. Yeah.
Okay, I'll throw 2 cents in. Actually, we know that Wakulla is connected by conduit to Spring Creek. And part of the reason that these dark days are occurring is saltwater intrusion into the aquifer there is redirected flow from some of those spring stream descent features, and they flow at the Wakulla now. And when I was doing offshore springs work off the Steenahatchee, there's cave systems out there that look like Wakulla. Just they're huge. They're not totally unexplored, but they're limited exploration in them. And like I showed you, that Florida platform extending 200 miles off the coast. Well, when it was exposed at land, the agents that cause erosion now were causing that. I even wondered one time if offshore you didn't have incredibly big springs, if you had 60 miles of recharge before you had a discharge point. So, yes, they are out there.
Okay, let's do an in-house. Go ahead. Yes, please. Yes, you, sir.
Monday night, the County Commission is going to take a look at their new regulations in regard to springs and rivers. And the new regulation seems to have been watered down to accommodate a gas station over Chips Hole. And I was wondering, what do you guys think about the idea of putting in-ground tanks over Chips Hole to accommodate Southwest Georgia Oil gas station?
Don't hand that to me. What you're really doing is ask us to take a position on that. As a scientist, you know, it's a vulnerable area. There's no question about that. But you're going to have to follow whatever regulation the state has. I mean, or if the company will work with you if you've got other ideas. But I don't think Chris or myself or the other young man would, you know, state a position right here specific unless you get in court.
I mean, you've clearly got some vulnerability there, which I think is obvious to most. You know, however, if you were to put a CVS there or something, I think that the impact would be probably minimal. Yeah, so I think it depends what you're going to put there.
So fuel is probably not a good idea in the past,
Without saying.
David, I think they tried to answer the question in a fair way, and the science speaks for itself, and like all of us, the regulations do hamstring some activities for sure. I can only we're almost out of time. I'm going to take one more question online. And it's from the Friends of Lake Jackson. I really want to know a little bit more about the connection between Porter Sink and Wakulla.
So do we. So FGS ran a dye trace there, I believe it was last year, monitored for close to a year or a little over a year, and didn't find any dye. So that is probably a trace that needs repeated with probably a lot more monitoring stations to figure out where that dye comes from.
Oh, is it a short question?
Yes. I was very surprised about the Splenda study in the water. And I'm wondering, what are the effects that you see, or, I mean, what are the toxic ramifications of Splenda in the water?
Well, you need a biologist to answer that question. From what I've read, it can affect some microorganisms, but I wouldn't get too worked up over Splenda because there's a bunch of things out there, you know, that are in groundwater way worse than Splenda. but no, I think it was so good for scientists is that it proves direct connections from human-induced pollution that with wastewater. I mean, because if you see that, it's coming from wastewater. You might have to figure out where the wastewater or whose wastewater, but it's wastewater. But yeah, you bring up that question. Read about your fluorescein in your toothpaste if you want to read about something.
Fluorescein.
Yeah, in your toothpaste. Sorry.
The point being, Splenda research is that it actually shows that our impact is quite evident in the aquifers. So wherever there's a wastewater treatment plant, there's potential for impact to the wastewater, to the groundwater. Listen, everyone, I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. I really appreciate everyone's attention. I appreciate our speakers so much. And they did a great job, and I really appreciate them sharing their expertise with us. I also want to remind everyone that the health of the Springs Basin is the responsibility of all of us here and everyone online. To that end, please do your part to stay informed with federal, state regulations, local ordinance, local action. And the impact of the health of the springs is really our responsibility. And to that end, as was mentioned earlier, there is a ordinance before the board. And so please reach out to your county and learn about it and stay informed. Let your voices be heard. Thank you, everyone. And good night.